Hello and welcome to the Horti-Culturalists. I'm Stephen Ryan.
And I am Matthew Lucas, and we do post every week on a Friday, so do hit subscribe if you want to follow our continuing horticultural adventures, which today, Stephen, are what?
We're going to look at a genus of trees that I adore, and that's the Arbutus.
Yes, are we not beneath the shade of a spreading Arbutus tree?
We certainly are. This is one of a couple of different Arbutuses that I have in the garden at home, and this one is one of the Mexican species.
Yep.
And the Arbutus are a really interesting genus because they extend from Mexico up through the United States, particularly up the west coast. Then you'll find a disjointed sort of European connection with them, and they extend right across to the Canary Islands, and there's also one species, as far as I know, that grows in northern Africa.
Wow, so quite scattered.
Yes, quite scattered, and they are a remarkable group of trees for their longevity, their hardiness, and of course that a number of them are quite rare and hard to propagate, so a number of them are actually what I would consider desirable due to their rareness.
Yes, so this one,
Arbutus glandulosa.
Yep.
We would just call it the Mexican strawberry tree, although it's not the only species from Mexico, and we will see another one in the video.
Yep.
Glandulosa, I originally got it from cuttings that I grew from one that's growing in the Botanic Gardens in Melbourne.
Yes.
And this actually is the original cutting plant that I struck, and it's done remarkably well in the garden here, and it does all the classical things you'd expect of Arbutus. It has white flowers, attractive fruit, and bark that exfoliates regularly. So at the moment we're in late winter and the bark is almost a sort of coppery green colour. During the season it'll end up going to a remarkable sort of deep, almost mahogany colour, and then it'll all peel off in great big sheets.
We've got footage of that, which we happened to catch, which is brilliant.
Yep, and then it goes to an almost white underneath, and then the whole cycle starts again.
So I think, is it fair to say that one of the reasons you would use Arbutus, I mean, apart from the fact that they can be drought tolerant and tough, whatever, is that bark, the barkiness? It's so beautiful, and the bark transitions over the years, so it becomes a real feature.
And it's not the same all the time.
No, not that many trees do that.
No, yes, well, exactly, and that's the other thing with Arbutus. They're nearly all trees of a dimension that I would say would make a good small to medium garden specimen tree if you're looking for an attractive evergreen to plant in your garden, because none of them get vast, although I have to say the North American one, which we'll see, is probably the biggest of them. It grows quite big, but I would still be happy with one of those instead of perhaps half a dozen other things, because it does so many different things for me.
Now I noticed with this one that the flowers are just going over, so is it consistent that they all bloom in winter? And
as far as I know. I mean, I
spring.
haven't met all the Arbutus species. It's not a big genus, but I haven't met them all. But as far as I know, all the ones that I'm familiar with tend to be sort of winter, early spring flowering. All right, we're going to leave my garden now, and we're going to go and do a little bit of visiting.
Yes.
So I guess the first one that we might go and see might be my friend Dale, who's just round the corner and happens to have a specimen of the Canary Islands.
Okay, let's go.
Well, we're now in a private garden to look at yet another of this fabulous genus, the Arbutuses. This particular one is Arbutus canariensis, and I bet you can't guess where it comes from.
Madagascar.
No. Good attempt. Yes, the Canary Island strawberry tree, which the true form of has only comparatively recently come into Australia. We've had a hybrid form, which we'll look at the Malmesbury Gardens, that has been masquerading as this for a long time.
How could it?
It has been, but there you go. We've got it sorted out now. Now the Canary Island one has quite long, slightly lighter green foliage than most. It gets a beautiful sort of soft coloured trunk that slowly goes coppery brown, peels, and then exposes the fresh, almost white bark underneath once a year.
And at the moment, what stage is it at now?
Well, its new bark is just starting to mature, so it's still quite pale. It will get darker and darker as it goes along, until such time as it goes coppery and then peels off again. And this tree was planted by the previous owners of this garden, and I know was bought from the Royal Melbourne Botanic Gardens plant sale some years ago. So this tree would now probably be 10 to 15 years old.
Okay.
So it's starting to make a good tree.
And I can see the new growth is, it's like almost a foot of new growth.
Oh yeah, it's doing extremely well, so it's very happy here.
So in terms of general conditions, like the other Arbutus,
They're all similar. The hardiest of the genus is obviously the Irish strawberry tree.
Yeah.
It comes from much colder climates, although it extends right through the Mediterranean basin and even into northern Africa. The Canary Island one comes from a slightly warmer climate than some, so it's probably not one that I'd grow in the colder parts of Europe and North America, but reasonably hardy, tough tree, and certainly loves a Mediterranean style climate. But, you know, we do get hot, dry summers, we do get crisp, if not freezing cold winters, and the tree is flourishing. It's a beautiful specimen.
It looks as happy as Larry and has no obvious sign of any damage from frost or anything.
No, and we've had some good frost this year, so it's doing exceedingly well.
Well, thank you to the owner of this garden, Dale, who is a passionate horticulturalist too, is he not?
He's trying to be.
There are quite a few wonderful things going on in the garden, so perhaps we'll come back at some point.
Well, why not indeed?
Anyway, on to the next Arbutus.
Good.
All right, any more in your garden?
Yes, I have one other that's big enough to make it worthwhile filming. I've planted more, but I've got one other that is a good, well-established specimen, and it's just over in the garden over there, so we might go and have a little look at that one.
Let's have a look. So what Arbutus is here, Stephen? I'm not seeing anything.
All right, well, you have to look behind you to see something.
It's like Panto.
Yeah, so there is an Arbutus above our head, completely enclosing the end of my house, and it's called Arbutus andrachnoides. It's a hybrid strawberry tree. Andrachnoides is a cross that is found in the wild, where the Irish strawberry tree and the Grecian strawberry tree had little dalliance.
Had fun.
Yes. So it's a hybrid between those two. The Irish strawberry tree, of course, isn't restricted to Ireland. So although they call it the Irish strawberry tree, it grows through quite large areas of Europe. And so obviously there is a chance for that species, which is Arbutus unedo, to meet Arbutus andrachni, which is the Grecian one. And the hybrid andrachnoides comes about via that. And because it has happened more than once, you will actually find slight variances on the theme within andrachnoides, because some will be a little more like one parent, some will be a little more like the other.
And so, care?
Most of the Arbutuses will grow in fairly coolish climates, but not really frigid climates. Because this one has unedo in it, it's probably one of the hardier ones, so it will cope with colder climates. But I find Arbutus as a whole are comparatively cold hardy. They're certainly heat tolerant, they're drought tolerant. The Irish strawberry tree, unedo, has become somewhat weedy in parts of Australia, so it can sort of acclimatise itself quite well. So they're very hardy trees and probably should be looked at a little more by Australian gardeners, certainly, because we don't use them anywhere near enough.
And this is handsome, and so it's got beautiful little sort of creamy bell flowers which are just going over. So it is
winter flowering.
Late winter now, and so it's a midwinter flower.
And that actually does raise another little issue I meant to mention, and that is that most of the Arbutuses are quite nectar rich, so the honey eaters love them.
Aha. Okay, what is next on our Arbutus list?
All right, well, we're leaving my garden and we're going to go and visit a friend's garden that is just a wee way away, and we're going to look at one of the really beautiful North American species, which is even rarer here in Australia than almost all the other Arbutuses. And it's a beautiful specimen, and I sold it to him.
It's not about you, Stephen.
Yes, it is.
Let's go. Many thanks to the lovely Simon Rickard, who's allowed us to come into his wonderful garden to look at
the creme de la creme of Arbutus.
As Miss Jean Brodie would have said, the creme de la creme of Arbutus.
Yes, this is Arbutus menziesii, which is one of the North American species, and it goes from Western Canada, so down the west coast, all the way down to Mexico. I saw masses of it when I was in Oregon.
The entire length of the continent. That's extraordinary.
And it's probably the biggest growing of all the Arbutuses, and this one's getting to quite a good size now. This tree itself is one of the few in Australia, so we're very lucky to be here.
Why is that?
It's rather hard to raise from seed. It's inclined to damp off. So you get the seedlings germinated, and then you get lots of botrytis, fungal diseases, and they die out very easily. So it's very hard to get one established. I'm not altogether sure that it doesn't like some sort of mycorrhizal connection as well, and this one seems to have managed that.
I love a mycorrhizal connection. Mycorrhizal, the great unsung heroes of botany.
Exactly. Now, this tree in North America grows in huge quantities, but often in areas that are then developed as real estate to build houses on. What happens there is they build their houses in amongst these beautiful menziesii, which are known as madrone trees in North America, and then they start putting down a lawn, they start watering the lawn, and they kill the arbutuses because they like a nice dry summer period, so a very Mediterranean style climate to grow well, so they need to be left alone as much as possible.
So to contextualize this, Simon's garden is in an area, how far away is it from your garden here?
By car, probably 40 minutes.
Slightly different climatically.
It's colder in the winter. They get much more frost here than what I get back in Macedon. It's a more open garden, so they get a lot more light than my garden gets. I raised a batch of these Arbutus menziesii years ago, and as far as I know, this one of Simon's is the only one still standing.
You supplied this one?
Yes, I supplied it as a young seedling plant. Other customers had them but lost them. I lost mine.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so I killed one as well, and Simon's is the only one that survived, and it's made a stunning tree.
And why do you think it particularly likes this spot then?
Well, it's got a very deep, well-drained soil, so it's never going to get too wet because this is potato country out here. Where it's got that volcanic soil and it goes down forever, so the root system is never going to get too wet. It gets adequate winter rain, so it pumps itself up quite nicely, but it'll never need irrigation or anything like that, so it's perfectly adapted to growing in this climate without fiddling with it. So here we have probably Australia's best specimen of Arbutus menziesii, as far as I know.
So you supplied it how long ago?
I think somewhere around about the 20 to 25 years ago.
Because it's a good size, it's grown quickly.
Yeah, it has. It's made a good tree, and this is still a pup. I mean, they can get substantially bigger. So the madrone tree, or Arbutus menziesii, is probably the most impressive of the genus.
Now, we'll just get a bit closer and look at the leaves, because there's a lovely detail I want to ask you about.
All right, fair enough.
Let's go. I did just notice that beautiful, really sort of deep red element in the leaves there.
Yeah, on the petiole.
The petiole.
Yes, the leaf stem. So menziesii has quite a big leathery leaf.
Beautiful leaf.
Quite broad for its length, and it does get these red petioles, and it very quickly behind the stem starts to develop the mature bark.
Yeah.
And like many of these, particularly the North American and Mediterranean species, the bark peels off every year. So at the moment, it's got sort of patchy bark on it. Later in the season, all that bark will lift in great big sheets and peel right off, and it'll be almost white underneath.
So flower and fruit-wise, similar?
Similar, red fruit, little pinky white urn-shaped flowers like all of the other arbutuses.
Yep.
It's just one on steroids, basically.
So, alas though, probably quite difficult for a lot of our viewers, because if you have damp summers, you're really going to have to be in a Mediterranean climate to grow this.
You are, and even to get one though in Australia is almost impossible.
Did you grow yours from seed when you sold them?
Yes, they were seedling raised ones. I've got a couple of young seedling ones again recently that I got from a friend who'd raised some from seed.
Yeah.
So I'm trying again. I've got couple of baby ones about yay big.
Are you going to plant it in your garden again?
I already have two of them about this big, and I planted them right next to each other so that if they survive, I'll have these multi-trunked effects.
Many thanks, Simon, for letting us come and look at the best example of this tree in Australia. Is that the case?
As far as we know.
There we go.
If somebody's got a better one, I want to know about it.
Show us below.
Yes.
Now, where to next?
Well, after this, I think we might go and visit a collection of Arbutus that's growing in a local provincial botanic gardens, not terribly far away from where I live, which will eventually become the national collection of Arbutus.
Will it?
Oh yes, once I get round to doing the paperwork. And it's in a little village called Malmesbury, which is probably 35-40 minutes away from where I live.
Well, off we go.
Yes, good idea.
Well, here we are, Stephen, in the Malmesbury Botanic Garden, looking at Arbuti.
Yes.
And if we spin the camera cunningly, look at that fantastic bluestone viaduct, which is one of the, well, the great things of this region, isn't it?
It certainly is.
Enough of colonial infrastructure. Ta-da! Well, what is this one, Stephen?
Well, this is Arbutus andrachnoides again. We had a look at mine in the garden at home.
Yep.
It's the hybrid strawberry tree between the Irish one and the Grecian one. And we needed to engage with this one for its historic importance more than anything else. Yes, and we'll have a look at the trunks and things inside in a minute. But this plant was supplied to this little provincial botanic gardens by Baron von Mueller, who was the first director of the Melbourne Botanic Gardens and also the government botanist.
Yeah.
And he supplied a lot of trees to a lot of these small provincial gardens that were put in by the proud forefathers. So we ended up with dozens of small provincial botanic gardens around the state of Victoria. So Malmesbury's one of those. This tree had a nasty accident, I might add, about 15, 20 years ago when it split and fell apart in a storm. So they cleaned up the broken branches, and now it has grown as a coppiced plant. So it's regrown again, so the same tree is here, but it's not got the same quite impressive size that it would have had. But, of course, a lot of these trees we grow for their beautiful bark. Obviously, the more trunks you have, the more bark you have, and so single-trunked trees with beautiful bark aren't as good as multi-trunk trees with beautiful
And
bark.
I have to say, and we're going to go in now and have a look, it is stunning. And when it's a bit bigger and you can start to clean up the branches, it will look amazing, very sculptural. Well, should we go and have a, let's go into the bowels of the tree.
Why not, indeed?
Well, here we are. Now, to your point, Stephen, the bark, the colour, this is like pistachio green and then copper. It's stunning.
We'll show you the existing old trunks that are still in there, these sort of stumps, and all of this is regrowth from those stumps. So you don't need to be frightened of arbutus. You can prune them as hard as you need to in some ways.
But also not frightened of damage. So this tree was effectively felled and it sprung. Now, technical question then, this is not a lignotuber that has regrown. So we've seen a few plants in our trajectory that have lignotubers that will send things up.
Yeah.
When we were talking to Mitch at Cruden with that wonderful avenue of lemon-scented gums, he made the point that they were burnt in, I think, the 1940s or 30s, and they regrew from their lignotubers as a eucalypt. So what's going on here? Explain this to me botanically.
All right, well, it's adventitious shoots
Okay.
that have erupted from the old base of the tree. So basically, the trunk is still there. As far as I know, arbutus are not known for their lignotubers, so it's just regrowth from the base of the trunk. And of course, they're in the Ericaceae family, which puts them in the same group as rhododendrons and azaleas and all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And they, of course, can also be cut down to a stump in lots of cases, and they will reshoot from the stump. So there's those adventitious buds hidden under the bark that will be initiated once the top disappears. But it's probably no more than sort of 15 to 20 years old since it fell over. The regrowth is that age. The tree itself is still from the 1890s, even though most of its top is missing.
Yeah.
It's still the same tree.
The roots are from the 1890s.
Yeah.
So would you suggest then that the next thing to do is to start cleaning up these lower branches so you can see in?
Yes, I would start cleaning out any dead twiggy wood that's in the plant, and I'd lift some of those lower branches up off the ground, so I'd take some of them out so that you can actually show off these trunks so that people can appreciate them.
Excellent. Well, I think we need to go on to the next.
Well, this one is Arbutus xalapensis, spelled with an X.
Oh, right.
Now, it is one of the Mexican through to Central American species.
Yeah.
I think it goes down as far as Nicaragua. It has a quite perky little rounded leaf. It has beautiful bark that peels off and is almost a grey buffy colour underneath and dark brown on top.
Yeah.
Seems to hold some of its old bark throughout the year, so it doesn't shed cleanly. But the botanists would now tell us, at least the ones at Kew Botanic Gardens in England, that xalapensis is in fact the same species as what we've been growing here as glandulosa, and we did some filming of the one in my garden at home.
But there happens to be a glandulosa, and I'm going to very cunningly spin the camera, and there it is. We'll come and do some close-ups of that in a minute.
Now, from my perspective as a horticulturalist,
Which you are.
yes,
I'm not.
if this and that are the same species, they must be at extreme ends of the diversity within the species, because they look quite distinctly different to me. In the wild, of course, that may well be the case. There could be intermediates all the way through, and we've just ended up with
The two extremes.
Yeah, with the two extremes. So we've got this form of xalapensis in Australia with its small leaves and its interesting different bark, and we've got what we grew as glandulosa. They could be right, but certainly horticulturally, they are quite uniquely different looking plants.
First of all, the key characteristics of this one are...
Smallish rounded leaf on what I know as xalapensis, and the exfoliating bark that hangs on the plant, and it's sort of that sort of whitish buffy grey colour.
Okay, now let us very technically walk, Stephen Ryan, across through the charming Malmesbury Botanic Gardens to its either sibling or cousin here.
Yes, now you can see that the foliage is not only larger, it's also a softer shade of green. It's not quite as dark.
The trunk, to my eye, is completely different.
The trunk is completely different. It completely exfoliates.
And also the shape.
Yeah, so it's got a lot of characteristics about it that are different from xalapensis. So I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, the judgment is still to be made.
Pending.
But Kew Botanic Gardens has sunk glandulosa into xalapensis.
There we go.
So there you go.
On to the next. What is this one, Stephen?
Well, this one's an interesting one as well, because for a long time this was listed as Arbutus canariensis, so the Canary Island strawberry tree. We've recently worked out, in fact, that most of the Canary Island strawberry trees of any size in Australia are actually the hybrid between it and the Irish strawberry tree. So it goes under the rather wheelbarrow-ish name of Arbutus androsterilis.
Not an attractive name, but
no, not particularly. But anyhow, so it's a hybrid that does show up in the wild, because the Irish strawberry tree and the Canary Island strawberry tree both are found on the Canary
on one summer's night.
Yeah, and it grows, well, the Canary Island one grows on 3 or 4 of the main islands of the Canary Islands. So this hybrid's been around a long time, and it also has very attractive bark, but its bark is courtesy of the canariensis, because we will look at unedo, the commonly grown Irish strawberry tree, in a minute, and it's the dowdy one of the group.
It's a plain thing, poor darling.
The Arbutus are nearly always multiple trunked. I have seen individual specimens with a single trunk, but it's more the exception, not the rule.
Well, should we now go and look at the plain cousin?
Yes, what a good idea.
Well, here we are, the plain cousin.
Yes, exactly. Arbutus unedo, the Irish strawberry tree.
Yes.
By the way, unedo means edible, but you'll only eat one. It's probably the most commonly planted species around the world, and it's the Irish strawberry tree that probably has the most uninteresting bark of all of the species, unfortunately. But it's still a very useful plant, makes a good hedging plant, and so they're a good screening plant. They have become somewhat weedy in Australia in certain areas, particularly in the Mediterranean zones, so they need to be looked at with some care.
Really? I have never seen feral Arbutus, I have to say.
I can bring you to some. I know where there's some in the district. So yes, it does self-seed itself around a bit.
But this one does have the fabulous fruit, really strong coloured fruit. So I guess
lovely
that's
red strawberry-like fruit.
A positive of this particular species.
And apparently they make a really good liqueur out of it as well. So you can actually use the fruit, like most things, you can ferment it.
Now, I'm sure we covered this, but it's called the Irish strawberry tree. Is this endemic to Ireland, or is it common throughout Europe?
It's common throughout Europe, and that's why you find hybrids between it and the Grecian strawberry tree. It's why you find hybrids between this one and the Canary Island species. And it grows in a very small area in Western Ireland, but it grows all the way through Europe. So it's acquired the name of Irish strawberry tree because that's where it was first seen by the British, and in fact there is some debate as to whether it's truly native or not. One of the debates is that it survived the last ice age in Southern Ireland.
I love that kind of story, you know, things that just hid in a corner and
and came back again. But there are some people who suggest that it may well have come in with the Romans or something else. I don't know. I don't know what the Romans were doing in southwestern Ireland.
Planting decorative trees, but whatever.
But anyhow, so it's seen in Southern Ireland in a very small and isolated area, but it extends all the way through parts of Europe. Arbutus unedo, the common Irish strawberry tree, and it does come in a form called rubra, which has deep pink flowers as well. The genus is only of about 12 species that are accepted, so it's quite a small genus. And so the Malmesbury Botanic Gardens, in the not too distant future when I get the paperwork organised, will be holding the National Arbutus Collection for Plant Trust, our Australian registration body.
There you go, and we'll put the link to that below. And there is a similar body in Britain. Is there a similar body in the US?
I am not sure. I know there's one in France. Well, we must find out, or somebody might get in touch with us.
Tell you
let
what,
us know.
leave us a message below if there is a similar institution in the United States.
That'd be great.
Interesting to know. Very well. Well, I think we have covered the Malmesbury Botanic Gardens.
We certainly have.
Isn't it interesting how Victoria has some amazing provincial botanic gardens that have really beautiful rare plants?
Yeah. You've got to remember that Victoria back in the 1800s, late 1800s, was of course very, very wealthy. And the gold rushes, all those things had created this incredible wealth. Beautiful buildings were being built. And of course, civic pride stepped in. And of course, one way of showing your civic pride is to install a botanic gardens. So Victoria's got something ridiculous like, I think, a dozen to 16 botanic gardens around the provincial areas. Unlike anywhere else in Australia, and maybe quite different to most other parts of the world, in fact.
Well, we're very lucky, and because they were planted so long ago, there are some amazing mature specimens.
Beautiful species.
Well, that was fantastic. Well, I think we have now done Arbutus, well, not 101, because there are many that we haven't seen.
Yeah, and there's some we probably never will see, but there you go.
I hope you enjoyed the wrap-up of Arbutus that we have access to, which was very interesting. Stephen, how could we top this?
Well, I'm not sure we will, but we will do something completely different next week. I'm sure of it.
So do hit subscribe if you want to see what we're up to next week. Thank you to everyone who let us have a look at their gardens today. Very generous of you all. So thank you, thank you. Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Malmesbury Botanic Gardens. And we look forward to seeing you next week.
Yes, so bye all.